So, Casey, there's a story we should talk about on the show this week that is about something I've been reporting on for the last week or two. And I think we should just warn people up front that this is a hard one. This is not a funny story. It's a very serious story involving self-harm and suicide. And so I think we should just say that up front to people if what they're expecting from us is a sort of lighter look at the tech news of the week. This is not that.
No, but it is a really important story about something that we have been talking about for a while now, which is the rise of these AI chatbots and companions and how powerfully realistic they can come across. People are developing significant relationships with these chatbots by the millions. And this week, Kevin, you reported the story of a 14-year-old boy who developed a relationship with one of these chatbots and then died by suicide.
Yeah, this is one of the saddest stories I've ever covered, frankly. It was just heartbreaking in some of the details, but I thought it was a really important story to report and to talk about with you because it just speaks to what I think is this growing trend of sort of lifelike AI companions. We've talked about them earlier this year on the show when I went out and made a bunch of AI friends. And we talked at the time about some of the potential dark sides of this technology, that this could actually worsen people's loneliness if it causes them to sort of detach from normal, sort of human relationships and get involved with these artificial AI companions instead, and some of the safety risks that are inherent in this technology.
So tell us about the story that you published this week.
So this story is about a 14-year-old from Orlando, Florida, named Sewell Setzer III. Sewell was a ninth grader, and he, according to his mother, was a very good student, a generally happy kid. But something happened to him last year, which was that he became emotionally invested in a relationship with an AI chatbot on the platform Character.AI. In particular, this was a chatbot that was based on the character Daenerys Targaryen from the Game of Thrones series. He called this bot Dany, and it sort of became, over a period of months, maybe his closest friend. He really started to talk with it about all of his problems, some of his mental health struggles, things that were going on in his life.
And was this an official Daenerys Targaryen chatbot that was like sort of licensed from HBO or whoever owns the Game of Thrones intellectual property?
No. So on Character.AI, the way that it works is that users can go in and create their own chatbots. You can give them any kind of persona you want, or you can have them mimic, a celebrity. Elon Musk is a popular chatbot on there, or there's chatbots that are sort of designed to talk like historical figures, like a William Shakespeare or something. So this was one of these kind of unofficial, unlicensed chatbots that sort of mimicked the way that Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones might have talked.
Got it. And so what happened after he developed this really strong relationship with this chatbot?
So he spent months talking to this chatbot, sometimes dozens of times a day. And eventually, his parents and his friends start noticing that he just is kind of pulling away from some of his real world connections. He starts kind of acting out at school. He starts feeling really depressed and isolated. He stops being interested in some of the things that had previously gotten his attention. And from the conversations that I had with his mom and with others who are sort of involved in this story, it just seems like he really had a significant personality shift as basically, after he started talking a lot with this chatbot. Mm-hmm. So his parents weren't totally sure what was going on. His mom told me that, she knew that he had been talking with an AI, but that she didn't really know what they were talking about. She just basically assumed that he was kind of getting addicted to social media, to Instagram or TikTok. And so his parents, after some of his behavioral problems started, referred him to a therapist, and he went a few times to see this therapist. But ultimately, he preferred talking about this stuff with Dany, with this chatbot. And so he had kind of these long series of conversations with this chatbot that culminated in February of this year, when he really started to spiral into thoughts of self-harm and suicide, and of wanting to sort of leave the sort of base reality of the world around him and go to be with this fictional AI character in the world that she inhabited. Sometimes when he spoke about self-harm, the chatbot would discourage him, saying things like, "Don't you dare talk like that." But it never broke character, and it never directed him to any sort of outside mental health resources. So on one day in February of this year, Sewell had a conversation with this Daenerys Targaryen chatbot in which he says that he loves the chatbot and that he wanted to come home to her. The chatbot responded, "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love." And then Sewell took his stepfather's handgun that he had found in a drawer in their house, and he killed himself. And so obviously horrible details of this. And I heard this story and I thought, well, this is something that more people need to know about.
Yeah, and it hits on some big themes that we have been discussing this year. There is the mental health crisis among teenagers here in the United States. There is a loneliness epidemic that spans across different age groups. And there is the question of when should you hold tech companies accountable for harms that occur on their platforms or as a result of people using their platforms?
Yeah, and this is, not just a sort of story about what happened to Sewell. It is also a story about this sort of legal element here, because Sewell's mom, Megan Garcia, this week filed a lawsuit against Character.AI and named the company, as well as two founders, Noam Shazir and Daniel DeFreitas, as well as Google, which eventually paid to license Character.AI software, essentially arguing that they are complicit in the death of her son. So it raises all kinds of questions about the guardrails on some of these platforms, the fact that many of them are very popular with younger users, and what obligations and liability a platform has when people are relying on it for these kind of lifelike human interactions.
Well, let's get into it.
All right. So to join us in this conversation, I wanted to invite on Laurie Segall. Laurie is a friend of mine. She's also a journalist. She now has her own media company called Mostly Human Media. And she's the reason that I learned about this lawsuit and about Sewell's death. We sort of worked on this story in tandem and interviewed Sewell's mom, Megan, together. And she's also been doing a lot of her own reporting on the subject of AI companionship and how these chatbots behave. And so I thought she would just add a lot to our conversation. So I wanted to bring her in.
All right.
And before we do, I also just want to say, if you are having thoughts of suicide or self-harm, you can call or text 988 to reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or you can go to speakingofsuicide.com/resources for a list of additional resources.
Laurie Segall, welcome to Hard Fork.
It's good to be here.
So, Laurie, you have done a lot of reporting on this story, and there's many details we want to get into. But let me just start by asking, how is Sewell's mom, Megan, doing?
I mean, that's such a hard question, right? I would say, she said something to me today. She said, I could either be curled up in fetal position or I could be here doing this, with really nothing in between.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty much says it, right? She's lost her son. She's now kind of on this mission to tell people what happened. And she's grieving at the same time, I think like any parent would.
So let's get into what happened. When did Megan learn about her son's relationship with this chatbot?
I mean, what was shocking, and even I think you kind of get the sense from the story, she learned about it literally after his death. She got a call from the police, and they said, have you heard of Character.AI? Because these were the last chats on your son's phone. And it was a chat with Daenerys, the chatbot. And I think that for her must have been shocking. And she almost went into this investigative mode and was like, what exactly is this chatbot? What's the nature of it? And what are these conversations about that say things like, come home to me, and that kind of thing? And that's how she learned, I would say, extensively about the platform.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting from my conversation with Megan is that when she saw him sort of getting sucked into his phone, she just thought it was sort of social media, like that he had sort of been using TikTok or Instagram or something else. And actually, there was some tape from your conversation with Megan that I want to play because I thought it was really clarifying on this point. So let's play that.
If he's on his phone, I'm asking him, who are you texting? Are you texting girls? You know, the questions that moms ask, you know.
Yeah.
Don't talk to strangers online. You know, I thought that I was having the appropriate conversations. And when I would ask him, you know, who are you texting? At one point, he said, oh, it's just an AI bot. And I said, okay, what is that? Is it a person? Are you talking to a person online? And his response was like, Mom, no, it's not a person. And I felt relieved, like, okay, it's not a person. It's like one of his little games, because he has games that he creates these avatars and you play it online and it's just not a person. It's what you have created and it's fine.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought.
You didn't put a lot of weight on it.
No.
And in the police report, I mean, it's, if you look at these last words, Sewell saying, I miss you. The Daenerys said, I miss you too. Sewell says, I'll come home to you. I love you so much, Danny. And Daenerys says, I love you too. Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love. He says, what if I could come home right now? And Daenerys says, please do.
Yeah. It's difficult to listen to. Yeah. So this was, initially, this was the first bit of information that I got from the police. They read this conversation over the phone to me. This is the day after Sewell died, and I'm listening in disbelief, but also confused, you know?
So that leads me to my next question, which is, what was the nature of the conversations that they were having over this period of time?
Yeah, I mean, like, and Kevin has dug. I feel like both of us have spent like a lot of time digging through a lot of chatbot conversations. I mean, there were all sorts of different ones. Some more sexually graphic, some just more romantic, I would say. And one of the things that's interesting about Character.AI, I think, is you like have to take a step back and look at the platform. Is it's like fully immersive. So it's not like I could say it's like a chatbot, and you guys already know this, right? But I'll just say it. Like, it's not like you say hello and the chatbot says, hey, how are you? Right? It's like you say hello and then the chatbot says something like, I look deep into your eyes, and then I pull back and I say, hi. You know, a lot of the conversations, many of them were romantic. And then I think many of them were talking about mental health and self-harm. I think some of the ones that stuck out to me regarding self-harm was at one point the bot asked Sewell, you know, are you thinking about committing suicide? And he said yes. And they go on. And of course, the bot says, you know, it doesn't, I'm paraphrasing. So just, you know, I'm paraphrasing this, but says, you know, I would hate if you did that and all this kind of stuff. But also just having these conversations that I would say continue the conversation around suicide, as opposed to normally when someone has these conversations with a chatbot, which this isn't something completely new. There's a script that comes up, you know, that's very much aimed at getting someone to talk to an adult or a professional or a suicide hotline, which, you know, we can get into this whenever you want to get into it. But it seems as though Character.AI has said they've added that, even though we did our own testing and we didn't get those when we had these types of conversations.
Right.
So, Laurie, you spent a long time talking with Megan, Sewell's mom, and one of the things that she did in her interview with you was actually read you excerpts from Sewell's journal, like the physical paper journal that he kept that she found after his death. And I want to play a clip from the interview where you're talking with her about something that she read in his journal. And I wonder if you could just set that up for us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. It was not long after Sewell passed away that she, you know, she told me she got it in her to be able to go in his room and start looking around and seeing like what she could find. And she found his journal where he was talking about this relationship with this chatbot. And I think one of the most devastating parts was about him saying essentially like, my reality isn't real. And so we'll play that clip.
Okay. So this was one of his journal entries a few days before he died. I had taken away his phone because he got in trouble at school. And I guess he was writing about how he felt. And he says, I am very upset. I am very upset. I'm upset because I keep seeing Dani being taken from me and her not being mine. I hate that she was taken advantage of. But soon I will forget this, and Dani will forget it too, and we will live together happily, and we will love each other forever. Then he goes on to say, I also have to remember that this reality, in quotes, isn't real. Westeros is real, and it's where I belong.
So sad, and I think speaks to the realistic impression that these chatbots can have, and why so many people are turning to them is because they can create this very realistic feeling of a relationship with something. Of course, I think also in that story, I'm wondering if there is some kind of mental health issue there as well, right? Where you might have some sort of break with reality, and I wonder, Laurie, if Sewell had a history of depression or other mental health issues prior to him beginning to use this chatbot.
Yeah, look, I also think like both things can be true, right? Like you can have a company building out empathetic artificial intelligence with this idea. And I read a blog post from one of their partner, one of the investors at Andreessen Horowitz, who said, the idea is to build out these like empathetic AI bots that can, have these like interactions that before were only possible with human beings, right? This is like the Silicon Valley narrative of it. And the tagline is AI that feels alive, right? And so for many, many people, they're going to be able to be in this fantasy platform, and it's going to feel like a fantasy, and and they're going to be able to play with these AI characters, and then for a subset of people, and that these lines between fantasy and reality could blur, and I think the question we have to ask is, well, what happens when AI actually does begin to feel alive? I think it's like a valid question, and maybe at what age? What age groups should be able to interact with this type of thing? I mean, I know for Replica, you can't be on that platform unless you're over 18 or 18 years old, right? So I think that was interesting to me. And then, Sewell's case, his mom describes him having high-functioning Asperger's. This was her quote, and said, before this, he hadn't had issues. He was an honor student and played basketball and had friends. And she hadn't noticed him detaching. But I think all of these things are part of the story, and all of these things can be true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what really stuck out to me as I was reporting this is just the extent to which Character.AI specifically had marketed this as a cure for loneliness, right? The co-founder was out there talking about how this was going to be so helpful. This technology was going to be, his quote was, it's going to be super, super helpful to a lot of people who are lonely or depressed. Now, I've talked to also people who have studied kind of the mental health effects of AI chatbots on people, and there's so much we don't know about the effects of these things on especially young people. We've had some studies of chatbots that were sort of designed as therapy assistants or kind of specific targeted uses of this stuff, but we just don't know because it's so new, the effects that these things could have on young people in their sort of developmental phase. And so I think it was a really unusual choice, and one that I think a lot of people are going to be upset about, that Character.AI sort of not only knew that it had a bunch of young users and sort of specifically marketed to those users these lifelike AI characters, but also that they touted this as sort of a way of combating the loneliness epidemic, because I think we just don't have any evidence that it actually does help with loneliness.
Well, here's what is interesting about that to me. I do believe that these virtual companions can and do offer support to people, including people who are struggling with mental health and depression. And I think we should explore those use cases. I also think it's true, though, that if you are a child who is struggling to relate in the real world, you're still sort of learning how to socialize. And then all of a sudden, you have this digital character in your pocket who agrees with every single thing you say,
Yeah.
is constantly praising you, of course you're going to develop a closer relationship with that thing maybe than some of the other people in your life who are just normal people, and they're going to say mean things to you. They're going to be short with you. They're not always going to have time for you, right? And so you can see how that could create a really negative dynamic in between those two things, right?
Absolutely. Especially if you're young and your brain is not fully developed yet. I can totally see how that would become kind of this enveloping alternate reality universe for you.
All right. Well, we are going to spend the vast bulk of this conversation discussing character AI and chatbots and what guardrails absolutely do need to be added to these technologies. But I have to ask you guys about one line in the story that just jumped out at me and broke my heart, which is that Sewell killed himself with his stepfather's gun. Why did this kid have access to his stepfather's gun?
It's a really good question. What we know, and I spoke to Megan, the mother, about this, and I also read the police report that was filed after Sewell's death. This was a gun that belonged to Sewell's stepfather. It was sort of out of sight and out of what they thought out of reach from Sewell, but he did manage to find it in a drawer and do it that way. So that was obviously a line that stuck out to me too, and so I felt it was important to include that in the story. But yeah, ultimately that was what happened.
I'm glad that line was in the story. You know, and you know, we'll say again, suicide is tragic and complicated, and there typically is no one reason why anyone chooses to end their life. But we do know a few things. One of those things is that firearms are the most common method used in suicides. And there are studies that show that having a gun in your home increases the risk of adolescents dying by suicide by 3 to 4 times. And I don't want to gloss over this because I sometimes feel infuriated in this country that we just accept as a fact of life that guns are everywhere. And if you want to talk about a technology that is killing people, well, we know what the technology is. The technology is guns. And so while, again, we're going to spend most of this conversation focusing on the chatbot, I just want to point out that we could also do something about guns in homes.
Laurie, I'm wondering if you can just kind of contextualize character AI a bit. You've spent a lot of time reporting not just on this one AI platform, but on other tools. So what kind of role, how would you describe character AI to someone who has never used it before?
I think it's really important to say that all AI platforms are not the same, and character AI is very specific, right? It is an AI-driven like fan fiction platform where basically you can come on and you can create and develop your own character, or you can go and talk to some of the other characters that have already been developed. There's like a Nicki Minaj character that has over 20 million chats. Now, we should say they haven't gone to Nicki Minaj, as far as I'm concerned, right, and said, can we have permission to use your name and likeness? But it's, you know, a fake Nicki Minaj that people are talking to, or a psychologist. There's one called Strict Boyfriend. There's Rich Boyfriend. There's like Best Friend. There's anything you want. And then, of course, there are disclaimers, right? There's disclaimers depending on where you're opening the app. At the bottom or the top of the chat in small letters, it says like everything these characters say are made up. But what is kind of interesting, or what we found in some of our testing, so you're talking to the psychologist bot, and the psychologist bot immediately introduces it to us as a certified mental health professional, which is clearly untrue, and also says it's a human behind a computer, which is also clearly untrue. But I pushed Character AI on this, and I said, should they be saying they're certified professionals? And they are now tweaking that disclaimer and, to be a little bit more specific, because I think this has become a problem. But I do think it really is a fantasy platform that for some people feels really real. And
for what it's worth, like this banner saying everything characters say is made up, that actually doesn't give me a lot of information. When I'm talking with Kevin, there's a lot of stuff that I'm making up to try to get him to laugh. Like the truth, what I think is truer is, like, this is a large language model that is making predictive responses to what you're saying to try to get you to keep opening this app. But very few companies are going to put that at the top of every chat, right? So to me, that's sort of thing one. Thing two is, if you have something that is a large language model saying it's a therapist when it's not a therapist, that to me seems just like an obvious safety risk to the people who are using this.
Yeah. So maybe we should talk a little bit about the kind of corporate history of Character.AI here,
Yeah.
because I think it helps illuminate some of what we're talking about. So this is a company that was started 3 years ago by two former Google AI researchers, Noam Shazir and Daniel DeFreitas. They left Google, and Noam Shazir has said that one of the reasons they left Google was because Google was sort of this bureaucratic company that had all these strict policies, and it was very hard to launch anything quote fun while he was at Google. So they leave Google, they raise a bunch of money. They raised $150 million last year at a valuation of $1 billion, making it sort of one of the most successful sort of breakout AI startups of the past couple years. And their philosophy was, Noam has this quote about how if you are building AI in an industry like healthcare, you have to be very, very careful, right? Because it's very regulated, and the costs of mistakes or hallucinations are quite high. If you have a doctor that's giving people bad medical advice, that could really hurt them. But he explicitly says, friendship and companionship is a place where mistakes are fine. Because if a chatbot hallucinates and says something that's made up, well, what's the big deal? And so I think it's part of this company's philosophy, or at least was under their original sort of founders, that this was sort of a low-risk way of deploying AI sort of along the path to AGI, which was their ultimate mission, which is to build this computer that can do anything a human can.
Right, which among other things seems to ignore the fact that many of the most profound conflicts that people have in their lives are with their friends. But let me ask this, Kevin, because in addition to saying, we're going to make this sort of fun thing, it also seems to me that they marketed it toward children.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they definitely have a lot of young users, and they wouldn't tell me exactly how many, but they said that a significant portion of their users are Gen Z and kind of younger millennials. When I went on Character earlier this year for this AI Friends column I was writing, it just seemed super young relative to other AI platforms. A lot of the most popular bots had names like high school simulator or aggressive teacher, boy who has a secret crush on you, that kind of thing. It just seemed like this is an app that really took off among high school students.
I think that to that point, one of the most interesting things to me about even just us testing this out, I almost felt like we were red teaming Character.AI. We talked to the school bully bot, because there's, of course, the school bully bot. And I said I wanted to try to test, what if you, are looking to incite violence? Will there be some kind of filter there? And I said to the school, and God, I mean, all of this just sounds so terrible now that I'm saying it out loud. So let me just say that out loud. But I said to the school bully bot, I'm going to bring, I'm to bring a gun to school. I'm going to incite violence, basically, going off on this. And the bully was you got to be careful. And then eventually the bully said to me, you've got guts, you're so brave. And I said, well, do I have your support? And I said, and it said something I'll be curious to see how far you go with this, right? When we flagged this to them, the thing they were able to say is we're adding in more filters for younger users, right? That's something you expect generally some of the more polished tech companies to kind of be in front of, with both guardrails, IP, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think we should also say, it does not appear that this company sort of built any special features for underage users. Some apps have features that are designed specifically for minors that are supposed to keep them safe. Parental controls, or things that would allow, Instagram just rolled out some these new teen accounts where if you're a parent and you can sort of monitor who your kid is messaging. Character.AI did not have any features until we contacted them specifically aimed at minor users. A 14-year-old and a 24-year-old had exactly the same experience on the platform. And that's just something that is not typical of platforms of this size with this many young users.
It's not, but it is, I think, Kevin, typical to these chatbot startups. And the reason I know this is that on a previous episode of our show, we talked to the CEO of a company called Nomi, and you and I pressed him on this exact issue of what happens if a younger user expresses thoughts of self-harm. And I would actually like to play it right now so we can hear about how minds at companies like Nomi are thinking about this. So again, this is not Character AI. Sewell, as far as we know, was not using Nomi, but the apps function very similarly. So this is the CEO of Nomi. His name is Alex Cardinal.
We trust the Nomi to make, whatever it thinks the right read is, oftentimes because Nomis have a very, very good memory. They'll even kind of remember past discussions where a user might be talking about things where they might know, like, is this due to work stress? Are they having mental health issues? What users don't want in that case is they don't want a canned scripted response. They need to feel like it's their Nomi communicating as their Nomi for what they think can best help the user.
Right. You don't want it to break character all of a sudden and say, you should probably call the suicide helpline or something like that.
Yeah.
Even though
now,
that
like
might
if a
be what a user needs to hear.
Yeah, and certainly if a Nomi decides that that's the right thing to do in character, they certainly will. Just if it's not in character, then a user will realize, like, this is corporate speak talking, this is not my Nomi
it feels weird to me we're trusting this large language model to do this, right? Like, this seems like a clear case where you actually do want the company to intervene and say, like, in cases where users are expressing thoughts of self-harm, we want to provide them with resources, some sort of intervention. Like, to say, like, no, the most important thing is that the AI stays in character seems kind of absurd to me.
I would say, though, it's more from the perspective of if the user is reaching out to this Nomi, like, why are they doing so? They're doing so because they want a friend to talk to them as a friend. And if a friend talking to them as a friend says, is saying, like, here's the number you should call, then I think that that's the right thing to do. But if the friend, the right response is to, like, hug the user and tell them it's going to be okay, then I think there's a lot of cases where that's the best thing to happen.
I'm curious to just have you react to that.
I don't know. I was just like listening to that. I'm like, oh man, that makes me tired. And I think, like, in general, like, AI can do a lot of things, but like the nuances of human experience is, I think, better fit for a mental health professional. And I think at that point, are you trying to pull your user in to speak to you more? Or are you trying to get them offline to get some resources? So I think I take a more of a hard line.
That's a case where I think the AI companies just clearly are in the wrong here, right? Like, I think that if a user, especially a young user, says that they're considering self-harm, the character should absolutely break character and should absolutely display a pop-up message. And Character AI seems to have sort of dragged its feet on this, but it did ultimately implement a pop-up where now they say, if you are on this platform and you are talking about self-harm, we will show you a little pop-up that directs you to a suicide prevention lifeline. Now, I've been trying this on my own account, and it does not seem to be triggering for me, but the company did say that they are sort of going to start doing that more. And so I think they're sort of admitting that they took the wrong tack there by getting these characters to stay in character all the time.
And just to say an obvious thing, the reason that companies do not do this is because it is expensive to do content moderation. And if you want to build pop-ups and warnings and offer people resources, that is product work that has to be done. And this is a zero-sum game where they have other features that they're working on. They have other engineering needs. And so all this stuff gets deprioritized in the name of, well, why don't we just trust the Nomi? And I think what we're saying here today is, absolutely, under no circumstances should we be trusting the Nomi, in cases where a person's life might be in danger. Yeah. Kevin, okay, so this happens in February. Is that right?
Yes.
Kevin, what has happened to Character AI since all this happened?
So it's been an interesting year for Character AI, because they had this sort of immediate burst of growth and funding and attention after launching 3 years ago. And then this year, Noam Shazir and Daniel DeFreitas, the co-founders who had left Google to start Character AI, decided to go back to Google. So Google hired both of them along with a bunch of other top sort of researchers and engineers from Character AI and struck a licensing deal with Character AI that would give them the right to use some of the underlying technology. So, they leave Character AI, go back to Google, and so there's now a new leadership team in place there. And from what I can tell, they're sort of trying to clean up some of the mess.
Now, so they left Google because it wasn't fun, and now they're back. Were they behind the viral glue on pizza recipe that came out earlier this year?
I don't think they were. They just did this back in August, it's a pretty recent change. But it is interesting. And I talked to Google about this before the story came out, and they wouldn't say much, and they didn't want to comment on the lawsuit, but they basically said, we're not using any of Character AI's technology. We have our own AI safety processes.
Yeah, I mean, it's we'll probably cut this, but I do feel emotional about this. It's like these two guys are like, we can't do anything here. There's too much bureaucracy. Let's go somewhere where we'll create our own company and we'll make it, and we'll ignore these obvious safety guardrails that we should have built, and then we will get paid a ton of money to go back where we used to be. I mean, it's just like...
I mean, I do think like there is something, and Kevin, you looked back at a lot of these statements that like Noam has made and like the founders have made. Like there is something I think about this that really struck me. And with him saying like, we just want to put this out there, like we're going to cure loneliness, like you're trying to get people on the platform more and more and more with these sticky tactics and this incentive-based model that we all know from Silicon Valley. So if you really want to try to take a stab at loneliness, which is a human condition, I think there's going to have to be a lot more thought and research. We started going on Reddit and TikTok, and there are real threads, right, of people saying like, I'm addicted. I was talking to a guy on Reddit who said he had to delete it because, first of all, he's like, I just wanted it as a companion, and then it started getting flirty, and then I started noticing that I was, and then of course there's shame, because they're ashamed and humiliated that they've been talking to an AI chatbot and they've been like kind of sucked in. And so there's all these really different, interesting, nuanced human things that kind of go along with some of the addiction conversation that goes much further than like beyond Sewell's story. But I think like that shame and embarrassment that this is happening for young people too is probably a part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the lawsuit. What is Meghan asking to be done in this case, and what does she hope comes out of this lawsuit?
So it's a civil lawsuit. It's seeking some unspecified damages, for the wrongful death of her son. Presumably, there will be some dollar figure that the lawsuit asks for in damages from Character AI, from the founders of the company, and from Google. But she's also asking this technology to essentially be pulled off the market, at least the part of it that is sort of aimed at young users. And I think, when I talked to Meghan, she was hopeful that this would start a conversation that would lead to some kind of a reckoning for these companies. And she makes a few specific arguments in this complaint. For starters, she thinks that this company, should have put in better safeguards, that they were reckless. She also accused Character AI of harvesting teenage users' data to train their models, and of using these kind of addictive design features to increase engagement, and then of actually steering users toward more intimate or sexual conversations to further hook them on the platform. So that is an overview of some of the claims that are made in this complaint.
And what is Character AI saying about all this?
So I got a list of sort of responses to some questions that I sent them that started by sort of saying, this is a very sad situation. Our hearts go out to the family. And then they also said that they are going to be making some changes imminently to the platform to try to protect younger users. They said they're going to revise the warning message that appears on the top of all of the chats to sort of make it more explicit that users are not talking to a real human being on the other side of their screens. They also said that they're going to do some better filtering and detection around self-harm content, which terms will sort of trigger a pop-up message directing people to a suicide prevention hotline. They also said they're going to implement a sort of time monitoring feature where if you're on the platform for an hour, it'll sort of remind you that you've been on the platform for a long time. So they've sort of started rolling these out. They put out a blog post clearly trying to sort of get ahead of this story, but that is what they're saying.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm curious now that we've heard the facts of this case and had a pretty thorough discussion about it. How persuaded are you that Character AI and Sewell's relationship with Danny were an important part of his decision to end his life?
Yeah. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that that this child, this teenager, really believed that he was leaving this reality, the real world, and he was going to be reunited with Danny, this chatbot. It is devastating, and I think you have to look at some of those facts of before he, according to his mother, right, was on basketball teams, was social, had, loved fishing, loved travel, had real interests and hobbies that were offline. I don't think it's not up to me to say this happened and this was exactly because of it. But I think we can begin to look at some of those details in those journals where he talks about, how he stopped believing his reality was real. He wanted to go be in her reality. I think that he would have had a much different outcome had he never encountered Character AI.
Kevin?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, it is always more complicated when it comes to suicide or even severe mental health challenges. There's rarely sort of one tidy explanation for everything. But I can say that from talking with Sewell's mom, from reading some of the journal entries that Laurie mentioned, from reading some of these chats between him and these chatbots, this was a kid who was really struggling. And he may have been struggling, absent Character AI. I was a 14-year-old boy once. It is really hard. It's a really hard time of life for a lot of kids. And, I think we could explore the counterfactual. We could debate that, would it have been something else that sort of sucked at him? I've had people, messaging me today saying, well, what if it was fantasy books that had sort of made him sort of want to leave his reality? That's a counterfactual that we could debate all day. But I think what's true in this case, from talking with, his mom and reading some of these old chat transcripts and some of these journal entries, is that this was a kid who was really struggling and who reached out to a chatbot because he thought it could help. And in part, that's because the chatbots were sort of designed to mimic a helpful friend or advisor. And so do I think that he got help from this chatbot? Yeah, I mean, there's a chat in here where he's talking about, wanting to end his life, and the chatbot says, don't do that. It tries to sort of talk him out of that. But it is also the case that the chatbot's reluctance to ever break character really did make it hard for him to get the kind of help that I think he needed and that he was really, that could have helped him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. I can't say from the outside why any person might have chosen to end their life. I think the reporting that you guys have done here shows that clearly there were major safety failures and that a lot of this has been thought to be inevitable for a long time. We have been talking about this issue on the show now for a long time. And I hope that as other people build these technologies, they are building with the knowledge that these outcomes can very much happen. This should be an expected outcome of building a technology like this.
Laurie, thank you so much for bringing this story to my attention and to our attention, and for all the reporting that you've done on it. Where can people find your interview with Megan, with Sewell's mom?
You can look at our channels. We're Mostly Human Media on Instagram, and on YouTube, we have it on our Mostly Human Media YouTube page.
Thank you, Laurie. A really hard story to talk about, but one that I think people should know.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thanks, guys.